Now to some more breaking news out of Washington. Hearings underway in D.C. that could determine the fate of CUSMA. And we just heard some fresh comments from U.S. President Donald Trump about where he stands. The trade agreement between Canada, the U.S. and Mexico is up for review next year. And there are growing concerns about whether the U.S. wants the agreement to continue, given the president's complaints about trade with his biggest partners. But these hearings provide a chance for industry groups, experts, and business leaders to share their opinions about the deal with top American officials. The CBC's Katie Simpson was at today's meeting in Washington. She joins me now. Hey, Katie, tell us what you heard at that testimony.
So it was largely pro-CUSMA, or USMCA as it's called down here. A lot of arguments in favor of keeping the agreement in place as it provides stability and predictability for industries and businesses. So, for example, part of this afternoon's hearings focused on agriculture. There were representatives for all kinds of American farmers and grain producers. Have a listen to Dennis Nuxall. He represents Western U.S. growers who farm produce.
We believe that the USMCA should be renewed, that tariff-free access between all three of our countries for produce is vital for American growers, Canadian growers, Mexican growers, and then consumers across North America. So that was sort of our underlying point, but we also believe that this review is an opportunity to look at the trade between our three countries in produce and try to make some improvements.
On that improvement angle, a theme emerged. Several witnesses spoke about challenges when it comes specifically to Mexico. Complaints about the low cost of Mexican labor, complaints about how in certain states, cheap Mexican produce undercuts American products. One blueberry producer put it this way. He said the good partner is Canada, and when it comes to Mexico, we have a partner we need to work on. It is important to remember that these hearings are a really big deal. The testimony could help shape decisions made by the Trump administration as the review of the trade agreement gets underway next year.
And Katie, this is really the start of what is expected to be a pretty rocky review process, right?
Yeah, Donald Trump frequently complains about trade with both Canada and Mexico, and he wants concessions from both countries. The review is set for June, and initially it was seen as kind of a procedural thing, but with Trump signaling he wants change, it is expected to be a very intensive, very uncomfortable negotiation process. In the Oval Office today, Trump was asked about the renegotiation process and what sort of he expects. Have a listen.
You know, that's just an ongoing thing. It expires in about a year, and we'll either let it expire or we'll maybe work out another deal with Mexico and Canada. But look, Mexico and Canada have taken advantage of the United States, like just about every other country, in all fairness. It's not them. I'm not blaming them.
Now, there is a lot to unpack in that statement there. Trump sort of framing of it expiring in about a year, that's not accurate. What happens next June is the formal review process gets underway. Canada, we understand, is going to be pushing for a continuation of the deal in terms of sort of extending it another 16 years. That's really getting into the sort of technical weeds of it. But the way Trump has framed it there, it doesn't just expire. There's going to be a review process that takes place. Initially, as I mentioned, it was expected to be sort of more of a formality, but no, it is likely going to be a very intensive negotiation process. That's at least what both Canada and Mexico are bracing for there. And also, I do want to flag, Trump has previously floated the idea of leaving CUSMA or coming up with some kind of new agreement, though he's not really gotten into any sort of specifics. So Canadians might hear that clip and might hear that it sounds very scary. He has said things like this before. The way he's framed it is not quite accurate, but it is something that is concerning to Canadian businesses, that is concerning to Canadian government officials that have to sort of deal with the Trump administration. And you know, based on the testimony that was heard today, if Donald Trump wants to go in a new direction, the uncertainty that would bring, that's something that many American business leaders and industry leaders, they don't want to necessarily deal with that.
Right. Okay, thank you so much. The CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington for us. Joining me now is one of the U.S. groups that's testifying this week. Brad Wood is Senior Director of the National Foreign Trade Council, which says its members employ 6 million American workers. Hi, Brad. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, JP. It's great to be with you.
So just last hour, as you heard there, Trump said he'll either let CUSMA expire or will maybe work out another deal with Mexico and Canada. What's your reaction to those comments from the president?
Katie really hit the nail on the head. In terms of the agreement, there is 10 years of successive reviews before it will expire. Ultimately, we've seen this play out in terms of threats to pull out of the agreement when we renegotiated NAFTA. And so as we approach the review here, you call it a review, you call it a renegotiation. It's critical for American businesses, for my members, that we see this renewed. And so ultimately, we will be working in the review, in the process that'll kick off in January, in my testimony tomorrow, to make the case for the agreement to be extended. That doesn't mean it won't have any changes. It doesn't mean that there can't be upgrades, but ultimately the agreement is too important for the integrity of the North American relationships.
Yeah, when he says CUSMA expires in a year, that's not exactly right? Because as I understand it, it actually doesn't expire until 2036. If they can't agree on this review process, then it essentially just rolls over year after year after year. There's not actually a formal mechanism to tear up the agreement next year, right? Like this would stay in place even if they can't come to some sort of agreement on the review.
Well, I do not like to interpret what the president said beyond his remarks. He used the term expire, and you are absolutely right that leads to annual successive reviews.
Okay, so tell me.
There is a clause whereby the president could pull out of the agreement with a 6-month notice. That is not what he said. And so I think we should separate the issues. And he ultimately pointed to the fact that if we do not see a renegotiation or an updated agreement, he'll let it expire, which requires successive reviews. And so those are two very distinct outcomes.
So as you said, you will be, before this panel tomorrow, you'll be making the case for CUSMA. Tell me what you're going to be telling these folks as they consider the review process. Why do you think we should keep CUSMA?
So NFTC, the National Foreign Trade Council, we represent every segment of U.S. manufacturing, in particular multinationals. Yes, they have a significant presence in the U.S., but they have a presence in Canada, in Mexico. They have supply chains that are integrated throughout, and they have customers around the world. We need this integrated framework to be able to compete and do the manufacturing that the president is trying to achieve here in the United States, and also export and compete with the world. And so for that to take place, we need this duty-free access. We need to get back to respecting USMCA, to respecting CUSMA, and get even beyond not only renewing the agreement, but also removing the 232 and IEEPA tariffs that are currently in place. And so that is really the case that we will be making, that the agreement continues to be fit for purpose, that it is working, and that, yes, there are areas that you could upgrade or refinements that you can make, but you can do that within the authorities of the agreement without opening it up and going back. But again, call it a renegotiation, call it a review. The agreement needs to be moved forward in earnest and hopefully re-upped for 16 more years by next summer.
So Trump said again today in the Oval Office there that Mexico and Canada have taken advantage of the United States. He's made that claim many, many times before. I know you know that. But does that concern you, that he is using that sort of rhetoric? I mean, does that not spell trouble potentially for this review process if he is continuously repeating that we are ripping off the United States?
The president is a negotiator. We have seen this. We saw it play out in the NAFTA review. Ultimately, he is going to be looking for concessions. You highlighted dairy. We know some of the areas that are priorities. What Canada needs to focus on, what Mexico needs to focus on, is making this a win for the president. So looking at areas of cooperation, whether that's critical minerals, whether that's energy cooperation, and hopefully coming out the other side, we can reduce and remove the tariffs that are in place and restore, the predictability that the business community needs and renew this agreement.
We were hearing from Republican Congressman Chris Smith earlier today. He was supposed to appear before this committee to make his remarks about CUSMA, but he couldn't appear. He sent us some of his remarks, and he says he's sure Trump will achieve concessions to ensure that Canada no longer takes advantage of the United States. Where do you see Canada having to make concessions to potentially get to a deal with Trump?
Well, I mean, we highlighted the dairy market access that we've heard the president repeatedly speak to. I don't have members in that sector, and ultimately, that is a sensitive and priority area for Canada. I recognize I was a Canadian diplomat at the Canadian Embassy here in Washington, and so I've represented us on agriculture issues. My constituency is not there. Where I am focused is on the broader competitiveness aspects. There are elements in supply chain cooperation, but none of that requires opening the agreement. For us, there are some targeted areas that we are looking to make progress on. That is some of the digital barriers that we've seen in Canada. Ultimately, Canada removed its digital services tax. We continue to see challenges with some of the online streaming provisions that CRTC is advancing. And so we will be looking for progress in some of those aspects. But ultimately, our overarching objective is to see the agreement renewed in whole with the removal of tariffs.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Brad Wood, Senior Director of the National Foreign Trade Council. Appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you, JP.